The relationship between tourism and nature has always been a very important relationship. But unfortunately, it has been always a negative relationship where one is thriving over the other. What Red Sea Global is trying to do is have a very different approach. We believe that tourism does stand a very good chance as an industry to be the role model, to demonstrate to the world how things can be done differently.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and thank you for being here, John.
Good morning.
We have a bit to get through, so we'll just kind of dive right in. There's a lot to talk about, and I know we want to really level set on sustainability versus regenerative, so we'll just kind of get right into it there. John, many people may have heard you talk about regenerative tourism over the last 6 or so years. I think we should start and sort of level set here with what does that approach mean in practice? If you could share a little bit about that. And how does it differ from being sort of merely sustainable?
Well, look, yeah, so when we did start our journey 6 years ago, we did talk about setting new standards in sustainability. And as we got deeper into our sort of analysis of the destination and what we were planning to do, it sort of struck me that, you know, sustainability is maintaining the status quo. And I guess we reached the conclusion that it's no longer enough. You know, unless we take decisive action to change the course that we're on, the future doesn't look terribly bright. So we started focusing on regeneration. And so what does that mean in practice? It means in practice actually trying to proactively make the place better than when you actually found it. So we set ourselves some very, ambitious goals in order to achieve that.
Wonderful. And as you mentioned there, sort of the point of view on sustainability, sort of maintaining status quo. If we think about measuring success for sustainability, for example, you're pushing that. You're going further than that with regenerative. So how can destinations really demonstrate that they are regenerative versus sustainable?
Okay, so I neglected to mention the ambitious goal that we set ourselves. So instead of maintaining the status quo, we set ourselves the ambition of setting an increase in net conservation value of our entire destination by 30% by 2040. In practice, that means increasing biodiversity, increasing corals, mangroves, etc. Now, we're dealing with a skeptical world today. Nobody's quite sure what to believe. You look at social media and everybody's like, is it true, is it not true? So we're going to let data dictate and demonstrate our accomplishments against that goal. So we've undertaken one of the largest baseline surveys ever undertaken by a private developer in the world. And not for our own benefit, but we actually publish it. And against that baseline, we will measure our progress. Now, we've set ourselves lofty targets, and we will report whether we have success or failure. But even getting close to our targets, I would argue, is success. And that's how we're going to ultimately validate what we're doing.
Amazing. So moving beyond sort of the definition and the concept of regenerative and sort of measuring that, want to talk a little bit about tourism in the space. Mm-hmm. So beyond that idea of rhetoric, what does meaningful climate and biodiversity action in tourism look like?
Well, like I said, I think, and again, it's appropriate that we're at COP28. There's been a lot of talk, and we're about action. It is now time for action, and so we set out 6 years ago to build the largest destination in the world, tourism destination in the world, powered by renewable energy 24 hours a day. And I can tell you today, we've done that. We've installed 760,000 photovoltaic panels at the Red Sea. We've built the largest battery storage system in the world to date. And to me, that's success. We've planted 1 million mangrove trees, and I've got an abundance of mangroves. We're growing corals. We're about to launch a marine protected area to help build fish biodiversity and build back stocks. That's what regenerative development is all about, regenerative tourism.
Amazing. And do you think that could be a framework that's applied more broadly? Or do you see this being very sort of local in its conception and execution?
No, look, we're very fortunate in Saudi Arabia and at the Red Sea in particular to have a supportive leadership and government and ultimately a very patient shareholder. We're using what we're doing in Saudi Arabia not just for the benefit of Saudi Arabia and the Red Sea, but also as a platform to really lead a transition towards a different way to develop. So we hope that by our actions, others will follow us. And I think as we discussed before we started, the consumers are going to drive this transition. We're showing it can be done. We're demonstrating that it can be done. Consumers are going to demand choices that they can travel more sustainably. And survey after survey, we're seeing that they are interested in finding sustainable options. They're willing to pay more. So as a developer, you can make that incremental investment knowing in the full knowledge that eventually you will get a return on that investment. And if you don't do it, I suspect that consumers will vote with their wallet and not actually come and visit your destination and would prefer to come to Red Sea.
I think one of the interesting things in talking to you earlier about regenerative versus sustainable is the idea of sort of the local nuances of a travel experience, right? So the context of which you're traveling in, the communities, the culture. Can you talk a little bit about how that's a factor and how you think about this? And even when you're thinking about sort of the framework for deployment, how that comes into action?
Sure. Look, I mean, we're obviously very much focused on environment and climate because that's the subject of this event and also COP. But what's equally important to us is the social aspects of it. We're working within local communities and we're empowering local communities. We're creating opportunities for local communities, creating new jobs. So we're spending huge amounts of money on upskilling young Saudis to embrace this new tourism industry that is evolving in the country. We have 200 students studying international hospitality management for which we provided scholarships. But more than that, we've got upwards of 10,000 vocational positions that we're now training for. The first 430 of which graduated in July of this year, all of whom are now working for us directly or for our partners, be it our hotel operators, the airport, and so on. So it's creating those opportunities. We've created one of the largest farming co-ops in Saudi Arabia to help teach local farmers sustainable farming techniques and giving them a market to sell their goods to. We're going to be a big consumer of produce, and so if we can buy locally, we support the local economy, we reduce our food miles, it's sort of a win-win situation for us.
Speaking of education, there's a common perception that regenerative tourism is inherently more expensive than traditional sustainable tourism. If you could talk a little bit about that, and is that a valid assumption or is that a misperception?
It's a valid assumption today because we're pioneering, we're doing things that others haven't done. But by us doing it, we demonstrate that it can be done, and we hope that others will follow. The more adoption there is over time, the lower the cost will be. As I said before, consumers are willing today to pay a little bit more to travel sustainably. So I think it'll ultimately come good. But I'll give you the example of photovoltaic panels to generate solar energy. When they were first introduced, they were super expensive. Governments had to subsidize to a great extent. Today, they are the cheapest form of energy that you can actually source. So it's cheaper than producing power by using coal. So that's the beauty of adoption and scale. And so what we hope we're going to accomplish is by demonstrating that it can be done with more people taking our lead, the cost will come back down and be more equitable towards a sustainable tourism rather than regenerative tourism. But somebody has to be first. And as I said, we can talk about doing stuff. We want to do it because unless somebody does it, we're going to sit around looking at each other. So who's going to go first? So we decided to take that initial leap.
So Red Sea and you are doing a lot. We talked about power, mangroves, coral, education, communities. There's a lot there. How are you managing all of this, John? How are you guys kind of doing all this at the same time and thinking through that process?
I'm blessed with a very capable team. I mean, we're 5,000 strong today. We started 6 years ago as a startup company. We're over 5,000 people, passionate, professional, believers in what we're doing. They're committed to the environment. They're committed to Saudi Arabia. They're committed to upskilling and creating new opportunities, life-changing opportunities for many. So very fortunate in that regard.
Wonderful. Well, I think that's all the time we have today, but thank you so much for being here and for educating us in regenerative tourism.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on.